Hello, Pastor Steve Waldron here. Today I want to talk to us about one of those forces that is at work in our lives, in our culture, in our society, that is a hidden force, and that is the force that's been termed the Hegelian Dialectic. Now, this was named after George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, that was a philosopher in the early 19th century, wrote the Phenomenology of the Spirit and these type things. I remember they asked Hegel one time a question reading about this, and they said, when you ministered on this, or when you said this in the college class, what did you mean? We didn't understand it. He said, well, when I wrote that, he said, only two people understood what I meant, and that was me and God. And he said, now only one person knows, and that was God. So he wrote kind of cryptically and opaquely, but his writings have had this profound impact. And the one thing, the Hegelian Dialectic, is the thing that Satan and cultures and people use, that he identified throughout history, how to move people from truth into error, incrementally, gradualism, the frog in the kettle. So let's look at the Hegelian Dialectic. The Hegelian Dialectic says that there is a thesis, which would be truth, or the given norms or mores in a particular society or culture, the thesis. And so then you would come up with an antithesis that would be outrageous, and obviously it would be the exact opposite of the thesis. And the goal is to inculcate the antithesis into the minds of popular belief to such an extent that it creates doubts about the thesis. And so then laws are passed, coercion happens, decrees are issued that moves people from the thesis into what's known as a synthesis. And so the synthesis is not necessarily a midpoint between the antithesis and the thesis. What the synthesis is it just seeks to move people off the thesis, which is usually truth, but it could be just something common in a culture, that type thing, and in a society. And so once you get them to move and to say there's exceptions to the thesis, then the antithesis moves a little further away and begins to jump up and down, screaming, hollering, and this would be known as conservativism, trying to conserve truth and tradition. And so the liberal would be saying, no, the truth and tradition is incorrect. Let's scream and holler about it. And so over the course of years, and sometimes even decades, it gets into the public consciousness enough, weakens the traditionalists and the conservatives enough to where it again moves to form another synthesis. And so over the course of time, what began as an antithesis now becomes the thesis. And so either the conservatives become reactionaries and try to get the Hegelian going in the other direction, or as mankind's sinfulness, the second law of thermodynamics, we're going from a more ordered state to a less ordered state. We're seeing the universe break down, this type thing, that it just goes on into horrific things. Let me give you some examples of how this works. Like abortion. Abortion is illegal. In the 1870s, the New York Times said abortion is the slaughter of the innocents and fought to stop abortion. Yes, they were doing abortion in the 1860s, 1870s, selling drugs and abortifacients and these type things. The New York Times shut it down. So then in the 60s, you had the rise of the feminist movement, start saying it's women's bodies, blah, blah, on and so forth. And so all of a sudden, Roe v. Wade, abortion becomes acceptable in some instances. And so then they keep pushing, and then it's no longer 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 20 weeks. So then in 1976, the science of fetology comes out, where we can now look with sonograms at what a baby looks like, and we see what it's like in a womb and realize it's a human being in the womb. It's not going through the Hegelian ontogeny, recapitulating phylogeny, and all of this kind of stuff. It's not doing that. This is a child. And so, but they keep going and going to this radicalization to now we have abortion is legal in many instances, in many states, where it can actually be born except for the head. And then something is shoved into the back of the skull of the child. The brain sucked out where it collapses, and forceps collapses the baby's skull, and the child is born dead, and they call that abortion. And many of our politicians are for abortion up until the third trimester, up through the 39 weeks, 40 weeks, on and so forth. I understand abortion's got a lot of issues, life of the mother and on and so forth. But this is an instance of how there was a thesis of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The scriptures declare that it is a child, Jeremiah, from the womb, you know me, and all this kind of stuff. And so then all of a sudden, that which was the thesis now becomes the antithesis. And this is also a way, what the majority opinion, how to make the majority opinion eventually marginalized. And so we're seeing this all throughout. Now it can happen to individuals as well. We won't go into that as much right now, but you can think about that. This happens to individuals as well. That a little leaven leavens the whole lump. Look at gay marriage. Gays, Roger Mudd or somebody comes out with a special in the 60s, black and white, why homosexuality is bad and all this kind of stuff. You have the Stonewall riots and all this. And so it's this constant homosexuality versus the biblical mores saying this is incorrect. And polls constantly show the overwhelming majority of Americans were against it. But then with television, movies, pop culture, inculcating the conservative movement, it began to move to then 2003 the Texas sodomy laws are struck down. Then 2015 gay marriage is legalized. So that which used to be the norm is now the abnormal. And that which used to be the abnormal is the new normal. And just as there were laws against the abnormal then, they're trying to make laws against the abnormal now. And so it is progressivism. It's been said progressivism is the nanny state with the gun while you're disarmed. That's just kind of one of those jokes and that are out there. But it really does violence to the concept of truth, because there is an absolute truth. And so this is what textual criticism is to the Bible. Is it constantly tries to say, what about this error? What about this wrong? Well, this word's mistranslated. It's just trying to get us to say there's an imperfection in this book. And then when we do, which I won't, but I'm saying if people do, then it moves. Well, how about this, that, and the other? And before you know it, you've got a book full of myths, fairy tales, and you wonder why your children don't like to go to church, because they feel like they're learning myths and fairy tales, and it's a book you're not living at home. So why do they need to learn it at church? And you have a total breakdown of society. When society breaks down, the nature abhors a vacuum. There's always that Superman, as Nietzsche said, that will come and put it back together, and it leads to tyranny. Immoral people are very hard to subjugate. So the Hegelian dialectic, gun control, absolute right. Well, how about machine gun? Okay, nobody should have machine guns. Well, how about semi-automatic black guns? Oh, nobody should have those. Well, how about no handguns? Oh, semi-automatics are bad. Oh, well, blah, blah. And before you know it, you don't have a right to keep and bear arms. You just don't, because of the Hegelian. So the key is to defend truth, defend freedom, defend liberty. Don't give in. You don't have to be mean about it, but you do have to be firm about it. And pray, ask God to convert these people over here. How many people from over here, get converted over here? A bunch. And because usually this is a very unhealthy lifestyles, and this type thing, they're not thinking well, even at their best and their brightest, are usually partying, because they have no mores, they have no stopping points. So the Christians and those that follow morality are constantly coming to the forefront. And so we're seeing the Hegelian dialectic work. Fight against it. Stick with truth in the name of Jesus. We have the Spirit of truth, the name of Jesus. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. a word of truth. The church is the pillar and ground of truth. Just proclaim truth. It has great power. God bless you in the name of Jesus.